Yo, we are live. What's up, friends? Hello. Good to see all of you. I know, before you say it in the comments, I gotta fix that loop. It's definitely out of time, and as a drummer, it was driving me crazy, but we're live, friends. It just is what it is. I think I also hit the wrong button, and so Dr. Jemar Tisby is live right in this moment. Originally, I think I had a different thing queued up. Let me see if that's actually correct. Is this the right button here? This one. That's what I was gonna do, but it is what it is. So the secret's out. Friends, it's good to see all of you. Hopefully you're doing well. Welcome in on a very special live. I'm so pumped. Hey, really quick, maybe you're new to the New Evangelicals. Maybe you're coming over from Jemar's Substack. Hello, my name is Tim. I'm the creator and facilitator of the New Evangelicals. We're a non-profit organization. We do three major things. We hold space for folks who have been marginalized by the evangelical church. We advocate for accountability inside of evangelical spaces, and we do our best to help people explore the Christian tradition beyond what I call is the basement of evangelical fundamentalism. We are fully inclusive and affirming, and we are also anti-racist, which means we are trying to do two things for the first time as best as we can and always trying to learn. So on this very special live, I am so pumped how this came together. I'm going to bring it back in because the secret's out. Dr. Jemar Tisby on the show with us. It's so good to see you, my friend.
Yo, good to see you as well. This is awesome. Not quite as awesome as us sharing authentic Philly cheesesteaks in Philly.
Yes.
That's a core memory right there.
That is. So the story I think is worth sharing. So we flew you into Philadelphia last week because we do something called T&E in studio. We try and bring people in to have in-person conversations. And frankly, I love doing them. So we brought you in, and as on your way in, I said, Jemar, what do you want for dinner? It's on me. And you said, authentic Philly cheesesteak. And I said,
like
say no more.
I was so embarrassed even asking you. It's like somebody who lives in Orlando saying, "Can we go to Disney World?" It's like, whatever. But you were very gracious, man. You were very gracious.
Well, and I brought you to a real spot, okay? I didn't bring you to know what are they called? The two. Wow, I'm blanking. I can't believe it. There are two. Oh, Pat's and Gino's. Woof. There are two spots, Pat's and Gino's.
You don't have to be. A lot of people get nervous around me. It's cool.
Yeah, okay.
I'm just
Thank you. Okay, I feel a lot better now. I did not take you to Pat's and Gino's, the two tourist spaces. Spots. We went to a real, authentic, genuine experience at a place called Ishkabibbles 2 off of South Street. It was great.
I mean, you didn't even have to moisturize before you went in. You could just walk out and the grease would cover you. Great moisturizer. Yes.
Legit. And then the next day, right before we filmed, we had breakfast and I introduced you to another staple that's really a Jersey staple, pork roll. And that was amazing as well.
That was amazing. It was a high class, non-canned Spam experience. But I gotta say the omelet was amazing too, because the omelet, I don't think it was folded at all. It looked like
definitely
three big scrambled eggs that they just tossed the meat on top of. But it was delicious. All tens, no crumbs.
Yeah, I love that. So we had this amazing conversation. We'll air that at the end of this month, actually. And as you and I were talking, you were like, I'm doing this thing, my new book, The Spirit of Justice. It's right here, by the way. It comes out on Tuesday, and I have like this video prepared, and I'm like, well, Jemar, like, how are you gonna get it out there? And you're like, I'm not really sure yet. I'm still thinking about it. And I said, dude, let's just do a YouTube live. We'll have a conversation. There it is. Yeah, boom. I love that. We'll have a conversation. We'll show this video that you made kind of introducing us into this idea really of the Black history that people like me and many others just don't know based off your book. And we'll just have a great time with the live audience. And so that's what we're doing. And I mean, look, we even have right here. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I'm having an issue with the comments for some reason. I'm kind of surprised. Let me see if I can grab this. Huh. That's weird. Not popping up.
Totally surprised that you would even offer that. Yeah.
Hold on. This is going to bug me. What is going on with this?
There's something in the middle right there.
Yeah, that's it. But why is it collapsed?
Why is there?
Oh my goodness. I don't know why it looks like that, but okay. We'll try and pop those
Deanna, your comment is there for all to see. Yeah. It was that important. Okay, Can't wait for the conversation. Two of my favorite thinkers. I like that.
Another person from Joy, Chicago, in Illinois.
Joy. Joy. Yeah. I'm from up north in Waukegan, Walktown.
Love that.
That's
hey, here's some good news. Someone got their book today. Look at that. So,
Hey,
hey.
look at the supply chain working finally.
Totally. All right. Anyway, so I fixed the comments. Sorry about that, friends. It happens sometimes. So I'm looking forward. I'll obviously be reading them as well, but we have a lot to get to, so we're gonna kind of hop right into it. Jemar, why don't you? I'm kind of curious. First off, many people on this channel and on this community, they know about a lot of your work. The Color of Compromise was a game changer. I told you this many times for me as well. Really important piece in my renegotiation of faith, how I understood race in America. Really, it just opened my eyes to a lot of things. You wrote another book since then, and now you have another book out, this one, The Spirit of Justice. Why a third book, and why this title, The Spirit of Justice?
Why a third book? Because ABW. Always be writing.
I love that.
No, that's my thing. The Spirit of Justice is really, when I wrote my first book, The Color of Compromise, it felt incomplete. Like I was only telling one side of the story. And that was the side of, just to be honest, white people behaving badly when it came to race. And that story needs to be told. We need to disabuse ourselves of any sort of mythical ideas of inevitable racial progress in this country.
Right.
But the entire time I was writing it, I had in mind, but there's another side of the story. There's a global side of the story. But in the United States, I wanted to focus on the Black Christian tradition. Right. So it's not just, there's that question, that perennial question, is Christianity the white man's religion? I understand where it comes from, but no, because what do you do with Black Christians? And so the Spirit of Justice really centers the Black Christian tradition. There are some white folks there. We got some diversity. Some of my best friends are white.
I feel so persecuted here. Oh my goodness.
You're being left out of the story for the first time.
Come on. No, come on. Me?
Yeah. We'll have some affirmative action, white Christian stories in there. Some DEI hires.
I am dying.
Y'all, I'm joking. I'm a little bit looser, a little bit more relaxed with my friend Tim here, and I am just joyful and grateful on book launch day.
Awesome. I love that. So here's what we're going to do, friends. I mean, Jemar, you put together a really powerful, introductory video that kind of gives, I feel like the big picture theme of the book, a few different names that you talk about and why that's important. So I think, friends, what I want to do here is let's watch this video together. It has some great stories that I think would be really impactful. And then take notes, ask your questions. When we come back to the broadcast with me and Jemar, we'll get into that and kind of get into the Black history that you don't know. I mean, that was really, this happened over pork roll. I was like, I got the title. Let's call it this. Because, I do think, okay, I don't want to speak for all kinds of people, but in my experience, I have a few good friends of mine who kind of got they came out of the Black church, got baptized into white evangelicalism, and then kind of refound their heritage again. And were like, I didn't even know about some of these stories, and I'm someone who's deeply embedded as a Black person in these spaces, right? Mm-hmm. So I think this idea of the Black history we don't know will hopefully give us a peek into stories that we just were never told, that were motivated by radical faith in Jesus, in the Christian tradition, but pushing for liberation and for equity for the most marginalized among us. And I think we have a lot of lessons to learn from that into what we're dealing with today in 2024 with the rise of Christian nationalism, etc.
So just to cue up what we are about to see, y'all, this is a first. This is what the young people, Gen Z, are called a video essay. Tim, you probably know all about this because you live on YouTube. I didn't know the term. I was just I went to my boy Ryan Gentry, who did the videography and the production for what you're about to see. And I was like, yo, I have this idea. I've got it scripted out. So you're about to see Jemar, the writer, director, producer.
I love it, dude.
This is very, very quick job. It happened in a matter of a couple of weeks, right? And it focuses on the last chapter of The Spirit of Justice about the virtues that we need to pursue justice. And I give you the 4 virtues I talk about in the book, but I also give you 4 historical examples. So this is not identical to the book, but complementary to the book. And you tuning in right now are the first ever to see it. The premiere.
I love that. I have one more big announcement that Jemar does not know. Friends, any super chats that are given in this YouTube live, I am splitting with Jemar Tisby in honor of his book. So please, Give the super chats. We're going to split the revenue. Last time we did this, we raised several $100s for our guests. So let's show Jemar what it means to be on the New Evangelicals channel. Send those super chats in. We'll split all the revenue. With that being said, friends, let's get into your first ever video. I'm so proud of you. Your first ever video essay. I love it. Let's watch it and we'll go from there. Here we go.
I'm delighted that this great event is being covered by the media to the extent that it is. I don't mind admitting this to the press. I'm a little weary at this point. But it's something about the spirit of justice that raises up like a war horse. That horse that stands with its back sunk in. And he hears that bell. And I like to say the bell of freedom. And all of a sudden, it becomes straight and the back becomes stiff. And you become determined all over again.
But there's something about the spirit of justice. Ever since I recorded this clip of Myrlie Evers Williams at a press conference in 2017, that phrase has stuck with me. It was so remarkable to me that this woman, in her 80s at the time, could be so determined to continue the struggle for racial justice. I mean, she's speaking at the grand opening of the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, a museum where they have on display the rifle used to assassinate her husband, Medgar Evers, on their front doorstep. As I do this work of racial justice and studying our nation's history, I found that injustice is common. Evil is unremarkable because it's always so present. Devastating, enraging, yes, but not surprising. You know what is surprising? What is remarkable? It's not that injustice shows up so often, it's that the spirit of justice always shows up too. The spirit of justice is the inner force that moves us to demand dignity and respect for ourselves and others. It's the cry of our souls for the world to be a fair and kind place. People choose to do the wrong thing all the time. But there are people who tap into the spirit of justice, just like Myrlie Evers Williams did, and find the strength to rise up, resist, and get determined all over again. Howard Thurman, the great mystic and theologian who wrote the classic book, Jesus and the Disinherited, also wrote in the preface to that book, "Why is it that Christianity seems impotent to deal radically and therefore effectively with issues of discrimination and injustice on the basis of race, religion, and national origin? Is this impotency due to a betrayal of the genius of the religion? Or is it due to a basic weakness of the religion itself?" It's a haunting question, and a valid one. Much of the history of race and religion in the US is one of compromise and complicity. The failure of many people, Christians, to fight racism has led people to ask the question whether Christianity is the white man's religion, or as Thurman wrote it, impotent to offer anything helpful in the struggle for racial justice. I understand the question, but there's more to the story. What about the Black Christian tradition? What about the people who engaged the spirit of justice and instead of compromising with racism, courageously confronted it? We have this great cloud of historical witnesses who all testify that the gospel is one of liberation. It's about good news to the poor and setting the oppressed free, just like Jesus said. And we need these stories now. We're facing a social and political landscape that is deeply divided, The freedom to vote is at risk. The peaceful transfer of power is threatened. After historic racial justice uprisings in 2020, we saw a massive backlash in the form of anti-critical race theory rhetoric, defunding diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, the repeal of affirmative action provisions, and even opposition to African American studies curricula. We need some history. We need some hope. We need the spirit of justice. When we look across hundreds of years through every era of US history, we learn about dozens of people and their real life true stories of living for justice. Across all these different years and different people, we find some virtues they all had in common: faith, courage, imagination, and resilience. Can I get spiritual for a minute here? The Bible says in Ephesians, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." The people who resisted racism understood their battle wasn't just against flesh and blood. It was spiritual, and they needed faith for the fight. And one of the best examples of faith I found was Sister Thea Bowman. Born as Bertha Bowman in Mississippi in 1937, she's been called the most well-known African-American religious sister in U.S. Catholic history. She went to a Catholic school and at the age of 9 was baptized into the Roman Catholic Church. In high school, she sensed a call to the Catholic sisterhood. And in 1956, this young Black woman from Mississippi became a sister in the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration. She eventually earned a PhD and became an outspoken advocate for racial reconciliation. Toward the end of her life, cut tragically short by cancer, she spoke to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, a group of powerful and almost exclusively white men. She talked about the reality Black people faced in the church. She said it was like being a second or third class citizen of the Holy City. But she had faith that together, white and Black Christians could build something better.
If we walk and talk and work and play and stand together in Jesus' name, we'll be who we say we are, truly Catholic. And we shall overcome. Overcome the poverty, overcome the loneliness, overcome the alienation, and build together a holy city, a new Jerusalem, a city set apart where they'll know we are His because we love one another.
After she died in 1990, those who knew her best remarked about how Bowman did more than simply live. Her friend Margaret Walker Alexander, a renowned writer, educator, and poet, expressed a sentiment many others held as well. I think Sister Thea is a modern-day saint. A saint who showed us what faith looks like. I think the virtue that makes any justice possible is courage. And I can think of no older historical example of courage than Fannie Lou Hamer. Born in Mississippi in 1917, she was the 20th of 20 children. She had 3 strikes against her in this world. She was poor, she was Black, and she was a woman. And she would have lived and died in obscurity if it hadn't been for one fateful evening at her church when she heard a presentation about voting rights. When the civil rights organizers asked for volunteers to go register to vote, Hamer said she raised her hand as high as it could go. And that began a long career in civil rights activism. Reflecting later on that moment, when she raised her hand to risk everything and try to register to vote, she said, "I guess if I'd had any sense, I'd have been a little scared. But what was the point of being scared? The only thing they could do was kill me, and it seemed like they'd been trying to do that a little bit at a time ever since I could remember." That's courage. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the resolve to move forward in the face of it. Courage can be cultivated. The more you exercise it, the more of it you have. By the 1950s, legal racial segregation had been the law of the land for half a century. Especially in the South, it seemed like the system was inevitable and indestructible. But someone had the determination, the creativity, the imagination to devise a plan that would ultimately topple Jim Crow in the courts. His name was Charles Hamilton Houston. Houston may not be well known today, but he was the architect of the legal strategy to challenge racial segregation in public accommodations in the courts. He was born in 1895 in Washington, D.C. to a lawyer for a father and an attentive stay-at-home mother. He graduated from Amherst College as one of the top students in his class. When he served as an officer in World War I, he experienced crushing racism and said, "I made up my mind that I would never get caught again without knowing something about my rights, and I would study law and use my time fighting for men who couldn't strike back." So he went to Harvard Law School and then taught at the historically black Howard University and made its law school the most prestigious one at any HBCU. Houston taught his law students based on the philosophy that lawyers should be social engineers. They should use their skills in the law to help craft a better society and not just for personal gain. The NAACP eventually tapped him to head up their legal efforts to fight racism. From there, Houston started challenging the separate but equal portion in the Supreme Court decision of Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896. Long story short, the strategy worked. Lawyers such as Thurgood Marshall, Houston's most well-known protege, used the strategy to win the Brown v. Board case and help topple the Jim Crow system of racial segregation in schools and other facilities. We don't often think of the word imagination in the context of justice, but whether it's in the courtroom or on the streets, imagination is precisely what we need to envision a better reality. I first wrote about Charles Morgan Jr. in my book, The Color of Compromise. He was the lawyer who, in the wake of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in Birmingham in 1963, gave a speech that would change his life. Shortly after the bombing, he stood in front of an all-white businessmen's club and challenged them with the words, "Who did it? Who threw that bomb?" The answer should be, we all did it. And he wasn't talking to the KKK, the racial terrorists. He was talking to good people, the respectable people, the people who let racism go unchallenged, and now we're seeing the tragic and bloody results. Morgan's speech illustrated the principle of compromise and complicity with racism. But I didn't tell you what happened next. The next morning at 5:30 a.m., Morgan received a call at his house. "Is the mortician there yet?" "I don't know any morticians," Morgan responded. "Well, you will when the bodies are all over your front yard." That was the first of many threats that kept coming. The backlash had become so unrelenting that the Morgan family decided to leave the city. Morgan said, "There was no way for us to remain in the city of which I had been a part, yet from which I had grown apart." But Morgan is an example of resilience because he didn't quit. He went on to have a notable career in civil rights law. He helped represent Muhammad Ali when the champion boxer refused to enter the draft during the Vietnam War. He sued to desegregate his alma mater, the University of Alabama. He defended civil rights leader Julian Bond when he was denied his rightful seat in the Georgia legislature. Morgan never again lived in the city of Birmingham, where he had so boldly confronted racism. But he is an example of resilience because the spirit of justice in him wouldn't let him quit. How do you keep going when it looks like you're not winning? How do you maintain your pace on this marathon journey of racial justice? Well, part of the answer is we don't have to do it alone. We can learn from this great cloud of historical witnesses whose true story and real lives can inspire us to keep going. Look for the history you never learned in school. Look for the people who have too often been minimized, forgotten, or outright erased from history. Look for the dangerous past. the subversive story. These are the real, true narratives of people in every age in the midst of the most impossible circumstances who drew on the spirit of justice to keep going. Look for the spirit of justice, making you determined all over again. Thanks for watching. I write about all these stories and more in my latest book, The Spirit of Justice,
Hell
True
yeah.
Stories of Faith, Race, and Resistance. It's available now wherever you get your books. And you can follow me on social media at Jemar Tisby, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and be sure to keep up with my latest work at jemartisby.substack.com.
Oh, dude. Hold on. I got a button.
Nice.
Bravo. Dude, that video came out great, man. It looks so good.
Thank you. That means a lot coming from you, a YouTuber extraordinaire. But really, I'm like, that was the highlight, I think, of the day, and I'm so glad y'all tuned in live to watch this. Thank you, Tim, for premiering it. It'll be up on my YouTube channel, just that 15-minute video. But yeah, man, thank you so much for giving us a world premiere.
I love it. I mean, we have 230 people watching this stream. We have super chats coming in from folks like Darren. Wow, guys, I'm sorry this thing is so messed up. It should not be like this, but okay, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. This is so messed up. There we go. So Darren has given super chats. So friends, I just want to say thank you so much. We've gotten so many super chats already. People are loving the video. I mean, Jim says exquisitely awesome. Super awesome. Love that. So, I mean, honestly, Jemar, on a technical level, your editor did a great job. It's scripted really well. You did a great job writing it, and it's very powerful. And I think it really sets up the book so well, because honestly, as I'm listening, I'm like, I want to read more about these people and whoever else you talk about, because these are the stories that you don't know about. And frankly, in a world that, I mean, let's face it, especially in the white evangelical culture that I grew up in, it's such an ahistorical culture.
Yeah.
Like you just kind of think, like, you're just kind of taught, well, MLK solved racism, and anyone who still talks about it is just racist, or they don't know what they're talking about, or they're liberal or something. Then you read these stories, and you're like, and you start saying to yourself, wait a second, we're actually in a cycle here. Like, there are patterns to this, and there are people throughout history, in particular, the black people in the black church, who, motivated by their faith, said, no, we want to change the status quo. And interestingly enough, we're met with a lot of resistance by white evangelicals, and you start hearing some of the same themes over and over again. It blows my mind.
Yeah, I mean, this is the power of history, right? Like, I heard someone recently say that obviously historians can't predict the future, but by studying the past, we do see patterns.
Yeah.
And it's almost prescient because we're able to see the pattern. One very clear pattern is whenever there is some measure of racial progress, there's always a backlash. We can see this historically, right? Like, if there was ever a slave revolt, there was a backlash in terms of harsher laws and penalties around the movement, the literal movement of black bodies and how many people could gather and things of that nature. After the Civil War, emancipation, there's a backlash to that. There's this brief period of Reconstruction. Then there's this backlash in the 19th century called, interestingly enough, redemption. Now, there's a Bible word, but in this case, what redemption meant was redeeming the South, taking back the South from black people, from Northerners, carpetbaggers, and making it a white man's land again. And then, of course, you see even nowadays, many people will say that Trump and Trumpism is a backlash to Barack Obama being the first black president, that January 6th, in part, is a backlash to the racial justice uprisings of 2020. So there's patterns here.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, someone actually said in the chat, I'm going to read this out loud. Fantastic job. Definitely an area I could use more education on. I still remember my mom telling me racism is over and nobody can call us racist anymore after Obama won the election. Yeah, I mean, I totally remember the same kind of ideas being said when that happened. And also, I want to say, Grandma Z, thank you so much for the super chat. Again, friends, all super chats are being split between the New Evangelicals as an organization and Jemar Tisby to keep his work going, because as we know, his work is needed more than ever. So keep those super chats coming. But yes, I mean, I agree with you. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, actually, as you were talking about setting this up, you talked about how there's a perception by some people that Christianity is like the white man's religion. And part of this book is showing how people use their faith, who were, in this case, again, from the black church, who use it for liberation. However, my question is this, right? And I do think about this a lot. Is there, in a sense, is there some truth to that claim, given that, like, frankly, people who got saved in America who were black, especially in that time, were probably descendants of people who were enslaved, etc. Was the tradition still kind of handed down from their enslavers, and then was it kind of churned around on them, or was it really its own stream completely? Can you kind of give us that nuance, how that breaks down?
So it's important to recognize that Christianity was in Africa long before it was in Europe. It comes down through what we now call the Middle East, through North Africa and different parts of Africa. There were some enslaved people that, according to census records, had Christian names: Anthony, Isabella, William, things like that. And so that speaks to perhaps they were baptized and already Christian on the continent of Africa. Yeah. So, we should make sure that we know that Christianity with black people didn't start in North America or with enslavement, which is important because one of the justifications during race-based chattel slavery was, well, it is introducing these African pagans and heathens to the gospel.
Right.
So
right.
Slavery might not be that savory. Okay, we'll give you that. But isn't it okay because their eternal souls will be saved? This is an actual line that pro-slavery people used. So it's important to note that it was already there in parts of Africa. Secondly, it's a blend. I mean, historians actually have debates on this, but it is a blend. Africans came over, whether it was Christian or not, they had a spirituality that they passed down. But over time, you get more and more people of African descent who had never been to the continent, who hadn't come from the continent. They were born here in North America, in the United States. So there's a sense in which there is an indigenous African American or Black American Christianity that we did what we've always done in this country, which is we've taken what has been shoved at us and we've remixed it and made something good and delicious. We've done that in the kitchen, and we've done that with soul food, and we've done that with soul food. How you like that?
I love that. No, that's great. 8-Bit, thank you so much for the super chat again. That means the world. Yeah, I mean 100%, right? I mean, what's the adage that like white folks just don't, they don't season their food. Our food is bland, it's lame, Yeah, exactly. So no, that's helpful because and I'm sure you see this. You're on the internet. You have a public presence. You just see so much stuff and so many opinions being thrown around, and honestly, even for me, it's hard to know, like, how do I parse some of this stuff out? So that is helpful. So I'm curious for you, Jemar, as you're writing this book, I'm sure every person that you talk about in the spirit of justice sticks out to you. Are there any people, especially given our current cultural moment, right? We see the rise of white Christian nationalism coming. I unfortunately see on Twitter hints of what you said about why slavery wasn't all that bad, because look, it actually brought about the gospel. I mean, I've seen people say colonization was a net positive because the gospel was preached to nations. I mean, I see this on Twitter today. So, and I go, oh my goodness, like we're really in this cycle. Are there any people that you write about that you really think, man, if there's anyone that we can learn from in our historical moment, these are some of the names and here's what they did?
So many. So I profile over 50 different figures, movements, organizations in the book. I don't care how much of a student of Black history you are. There's going to be someone in here either you didn't know about at all or you didn't know this part of their story, because with each figure, I'm not just giving like a mini bio of their life. Usually it's a snapshot of something they've done. I also make sure that I connect it to their faith. So this is something other history books by and large don't do, is while they may mention Christianity, they don't really delve into it. So I try to demonstrate how these people's understanding of Christianity led them to racial justice actions. One person who I think we should know a lot more about is Robert Smalls. Robert Smalls really has an incredible story. If you wrote this in a screenplay for a movie, people would say, this is too dramatic. Nobody will believe this.
Wow.
There's too much to the story. So like one of the climaxes in his story, he was born enslaved, but then during the Civil War, he was enslaved on a ship to white people and was helping on the ship. But he noticed a pattern. The white people, including the captain, would all leave at a certain time of the night, go, out to dinner, go drinking, whatever, and they'd be gone all night. And they would just leave the enslaved people on the boat, trusting that they wouldn't go anywhere, that they were too scared to try to. Well, Robert Smalls, he's brilliant, right? And a strategist. And he's like, you know what? Here's the pattern. What we're going to do is this. Let me see.
Is that Robert Smalls?
Yeah.
All right. There we go. There
he
is.
So he's like, I noticed this pattern, and when they leave for the night, we're gonna steal the ship. Now this is audacious. This is absolutely audacious. This is during the Civil War. There's a Union blockade, so they do steal the ship. He learns how to steer the ship over time, right? They do steal the ship, but it's the dead of night. And it's a Confederate ship, and they're going through a Union blockade. So the hope and the prayer, it's not just him. They pick up some folks along the way. The hope and the prayer of these folks is that the Union doesn't see them, thinking that it's a Confederate ship, and just blow them away, blow them out of the water.
Oh my
so
gosh.
As soon as he crosses the blockade, he waves the white flag. He gives the symbol of surrender. The Union comes up, and they see all these black people on the ship. They're like, what is going on? And they actually escape to freedom. So he frees himself, his family, some other folks. And then his story is only just beginning, because now he talks about his escape. He becomes this overnight celebrity. He joins the Union Army, and they give him the captainship of a ship, the same ship he stole from the Confederates. And then he goes on to this political career, all this stuff. But the cherry on top was he becomes wealthy enough to buy a home. The home he buys is the home of his former enslaver.
Get out of here, dude. Stop.
It's made for a movie, if you can believe it, but it's real life. It's true story. People even during his time recognized how remarkable his adventures were. But the reason I brought him up is because he serves in elected office. So this man who had gone through all of this, A, could have retired in, relative luxury from his fame, or B, chosen some cushy job. He believes that the best way he can serve as an escaped enslaved person, as a Union soldier, after all that, the best way he can serve is through elected office.
Wow.
And I just think his example is one of many that communicates the importance of political democratic participation to Black people, even in the shadow of the Civil War and slavery and emancipation.
Can I just add an interesting commentary to this as you were talking? I was thinking, let's say that happened today. I would see media outlets covering it. Man steals ship. He broke the law. Like he commandeered it. Oh my, can you believe this person? This is no patriot. This is a rebel. But we look back on these stories, right? That back then were probably seen by that status quo, by that dominant power as like, look at these rebellious people. Look how they don't want to play by the rules, right? They're not fitting into society. They're stealing our ships. And now we go, hell yeah, you did, Robert Smalls. Like, we love that. It's interesting. It's interesting to see how history often tells the story, right, of what true justice looked like, even if in the moment people thought it was unjust. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And the sort of coda to that story is pretty sad, right? So he's serving in Congress, but in due time, white people it was South Carolina, basically take back the government and exclude him. kick him out, along with every other Black person. So that is sort of the consequence. They sabotaged his political career with lies and accusations and slander. So basically, like what we see now, where they'll say, but her emails, right? They did the 19th century equivalent to Robert Smalls, and they seeded the public with lies and innuendo to make them think he was of low character. And then, but here's the faith part, and here's the resilience part. In the face of all this slander, Robert Smalls wrote in 1909, but notwithstanding all this, God still lives, in whom we place our hope.
So his faith was like a grounding force for why he did what he did.
And isn't that a lesson for us, right?
Big
like
time.
This man went through, literally risked his life just to escape to freedom, then goes back into danger, working as a Union soldier, a sailor, and then serves his state and nation as an elected official. And after all of that, the thanks he gets is a manufactured scandal, puts him out of office. And through all that, he said, but notwithstanding all this, God still lives, and we place our hope in God. And so I just think that's a lesson for us today. Number one, the cynicism of our politics, the ineffectuality oftentimes of our politics, and at the same time, somebody who has, as one president said, the audacity of hope in God.
Yeah. I want to highlight like this comment. Fonda Webb says, yes, it is. My great-grandfather also escaped slavery in North Carolina and joined the Union Army. His name is Archer Shaw. He is listed at the African American Civil War Museum Monument. Powerful.
My.
Fonda, thank you so much for joining this live. Yeah. Thank you. It's awesome to have you here. It's one of the things that, and of course I have to do this because I know our audience. I have to go here just for a few minutes. I think a lot about how many of us are kind of in the middle of like this like deconstruction, renegotiation of faith. And as I think about it more and more, one of the reasons why I get so angry at my own tradition is because they only gave me one option. You're a Christian that looks like these very ultra-conservative, right-wing culture war perspectives. And the other alternative is that you just can't be a Christian. Right. And then as we deconstruct, we think to ourselves, well, I don't have any other way of being Christian except for all I knew. So I guess I'll leave this whole thing behind and just find a different like way of being. Now, to be clear, I'm not faulting anyone for leaving Christian thinking. I totally get it. I have plenty of friends of mine who deconstruct it into other ways of believing or no belief at all. This is not a critique of them. It just angers me that throughout American history, there's been other ways of being faithful to Jesus that look like what we've always hoped it would look like, right? Thinking about how we advocate for justice, for the marginalized, and we find that in the Black church. And it's just frustrating to me to know that for so long I was never given that other path forward in my faith. I always felt like it was either I had to submit to this like ultra-reformed theology or super conservative evangelical theology, or I was just not a true Christian. But now I'm like, I think it could be maybe even the opposite. I wonder about the allegiance to Jesus that these folks have, who are so steeped in their cultural war talking points. And then I look at the people that you're citing in your book, and I'm like, these people had radical allegiance to a non-violent Jesus in the face of real persecution for who they were. It blows my mind.
I'm glad you brought it up. In the racial justice movement today, if it is to truly make progress, white people are really going to have to sit down and learn from Black people, particularly Black Christians.
Yeah.
Right? So what you're pointing to in the deconstructing movement is, there are two ways to kind of demonstrate racial prejudice. One is acts of commission, and the other is acts of omission. You can demonstrate racial prejudice by what you do, by what you say, by how you act toward others, or you can demonstrate racial prejudice by leaving people out altogether. They're not a thought. That's what happens most of the time, especially nowadays. You know, we've made sufficient progress that it's still somewhat of a social faux pas to overtly act in racist ways. People still do it, but it's frowned upon, right?
Right.
But there's another way that you perpetuate racial prejudice, which is you don't think about Black people at all. They don't enter in any meaningful way your ideological, theological, sociological calculations. And that's what's happening, I think, in a lot of folks who deconstruct. Again, not critiquing their deconstruction, not critiquing if they want to leave religion altogether, but have you considered other ways of being Christian, particularly in the United States, where Black Christianity rose up partially in opposition to racism and white supremacy and this racial prejudice that so many folks who are deconstructing are disgusted by, but may inadvertently perpetuate forms of racial prejudice, not by what they do, but by what they don't do, which is think about, learn, and follow after what Black Christians have to say.
Well, if I could just say the quiet part out loud, I might get some. Well, I don't think I will, but I'm going to say a hard truth. I'll put it that way. There have been times where I've noticed that people, and I've had to catch myself with this too. You end up deconstructing, and you kind of end up becoming a little supremacist all over again. You know, you start kind of looking, you just don't really pay attention to other voices that should be, censored, or you think that you're the first person to ever think about these things. Like, because it's new for me, it must be new for everyone else. So let me educate everyone, right? Instead of thinking about, well, maybe other people in history and even in my cultural moment have been doing the work way before me. And maybe instead of me coming into this space, because let's face it, and I'll use myself as an example. I am what I call bro-evangelical, Theo-bro passing. Okay, I got the vibe. I got the tattoos. The only thing I don't do is I don't drink craft beer, but I probably could say I did if people would believe me. But, there can be this vibe of a guy like me, you deconstruct, right? But you haven't really decolonized, or you haven't even began to think about decolonization as well. And I'm still very new to this myself, so I'm not trying to say that I've arrived. I have not. But I've noticed that the difference between deconstruction and decolonization is who you're willing to center and having a new kind of lens for how you move through the world and being aware of that, right? And I think that sometimes I've seen people like myself, and maybe I've even done this before in the past, where you think that because you have a new reality, that you are now the new expert and should be looked up to as the new authoritative source because you read a few books, right? Instead of working with folks who have been doing the work and saying, yo, why don't we work together? How can I learn from you? What can I do to help you see how deep some of this stuff is, right? And then we combine our powers. Now we have the expertise of Jemar Tisby on the show, right? Combined with the size of the channel, and now we have a match made in heaven, right? And I think that's really important for white folks who are deconstructing to hear. Deconstruction is so good. It's so important. I recommend it. I love it. It can be liberating. But you got to think about decolonizing yourself as well, because whiteness can morph unintentionally, and you can repeat the same cycles all over again if you're not careful.
That's such a good word. And this is why I thought it important that on the book launch day of The Spirit of Justice, I'm on with the new evangelicals. I'm on with you. And y'all, just to let you know, I didn't ask Tim for this. He was already being more than generous, bringing me to his studio in person with an episode that's going to come out later this month. He offered, as I think, it seems to me as a way of understanding, the privileges you have, the platform you have, and really being generous with it and sharing it with someone like me and talking about this topic. So number one, I want to say thank you. I do really deeply appreciate it. It really rounds out the day for me in a great way. The other thing I want to say is, to your point that, sometimes when white folks figure something out, it's like they act like they're the first ones who did it.
Yeah.
So what's going to be really interesting
Yeah.
is how some of these folks that I talk about in the book start to show up without attribution. So I saw this happen with The Color of Compromise. There were stories in there that people just started incorporating into their social media, their blog posts, even sermons and things like that, without ever mentioning where they got it. Now, in conversation, in certain contexts, I totally get it. Not everything is an essay with footnotes. That's understandable.
Sure.
But it's going to be interesting. Like, there are people in here, Charles Morgan Jr., Queen Nanny of Jamaica, Sister Thea Bowman, who I talked about in the video, H. Ford Douglass, right? These are people who historians know about and have written about, and I cite my sources in the book. But I'll be interested to see if they start showing up in the popular discourse and how people might sort of claim ownership in a way. And honestly, I'll say this one last thing. It's sort of a victory for historians if what they write about ends up in the public discourse as just part of the narrative, and they end up not knowing where it came from, because that means it's been infused so much in the culture that it becomes part of the story. And that's ultimately what we want, is for this to be a common reference point for people. But, there is that thing of, you didn't come up with it. And, every now and again, it would be nice to point that out.
100%. I know we're coming up to the hour mark. Do you have some time? Because listen, my audience, they'll be here all night if we wanted to. All right, good. I got a few more things I want to hit with you while I got you. Are you cool with that?
Yeah.
All right, cool. If you got to go at any point, let me know. But like I said, my audience, they sit through everything because they're just amazing. So
y'all are amazing. Thank you.
Couple of things I wanted to kind of bring up. Let's see. Where should we start? You mentioned the citing of sources, how important that is. I totally agree. Let's go back to this perspective of like how in the moment I can picture media, right, talking about actions as like horrible and terrible, and how we look at it now, we go, they were way off the rocker. I actually have an example. I pulled up a more modern example that's a little closer to home in history, and I figured you can give your thoughts. And also, if you have, again, as we're talking, if names pop up in your mind that you talk about in the book, bring them into the conversation because you wrote it. But I want to get to this. Let's see. All right, here we go. This is Tim LaHaye. Good old Tim LaHaye. All right, now that's a little better. I'm going to read this out loud because I'll post this on podcast and people can't see this stuff. And by the way, friends, if you're watching live, please send in a super chat. All super chats are getting split with Jemar. It's a great way to support his work. I love his work. It's a great way to show him some love, especially after he wrote such an amazing book, The Spirit of Justice. It's out now. So, okay, this is a very interesting story. So for those of you who don't know, Tim LaHaye, the big claim to fame is that he co-wrote the Left Behind books, the ones that literally scared the hell out of like thousands, maybe even millions of us, right? But he wrote this letter, May 23rd, 1968, critiquing Martin Luther King Jr. All right, here's what he said. He wrote this to Wheaton College. It says, "Dear Sir, recently this report came into my hands, and I find it very difficult to believe. It seems incredible that a Christian college could participate in honoring an outright theological liberal heretic whose, quote, nonviolent demonstrations have resulted in the deaths of 17 people. As a pastor, I am asked every year by parents and prospective students to express my sentiments of Wheaton College. In all fairness, I would like to know if this article accurately describes the fact. I honestly will be quite delighted if you can say no. Sincerely yours, Tim LaHaye." Now, here's the thing, Jemar. We could rewrite this, and we could say, this report came into my hands, and I find it very difficult to believe. I cannot believe that this college would support an outright theological liberal heretic whose Black Lives Matter demonstrations have resulted in the deaths of 17 people, right? You can literally just put in a modern day example, and you would have the same rhetoric, the same style, right? Everything is so similar. So I want to point this out to the audience because oftentimes here's what happens, especially when you grow up white evangelical. You romanticize history. You think to yourself, I would be on the right side of the picket line. I'd be marching with MLK. I would never stand for slavery if I was alive back then. How could those people do it? But then we're quiet, or we do the classic, well, guys, you know, both sides. Like, for example, Jemar, I'm preaching today, but let me just say it. Nothing drives me crazier than when I say, you know, the January 6th insurrection almost overthrew our democracy. And what's the response? Well, the Black Lives Matter protest. You know, yeah, thank you. Justice takes sides. Yeah, you know, but what do they say? Well, the Black Lives Matter protest, they burned down all the cities. It's like, wow. So it's easy to look back in history and say, I'd be on the right side. And then it's even easier to explain away the moments of justice or calls for justice happening in our cultural moment. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, the both sides stuff drives me up the wall. That's one of the reasons I created the brand Justice Takes Sides, because when you look back through history, you see people who we now admire taking a strong stand on one side or the other. It wasn't this, listen, the part of what modern evangelicalism has done in the past at least 50 years, if not 70 years, going back to post-World War II era, is glorify and valorize this detached middle way. I'm not one or the other, because to say I'm one or the other is sinful. They're not Jesus. It's not holy. Look, just study the history. Okay? Look at the example of Black Christians who have this very clear-eyed, realistic view of the nation, of what they're dealing with, especially with white folk, right? And if it comes to something like voting, evangelicals have this sense that, well, I'm neither Republican nor Democrat. You know, they write in the name Jesus on the ballot because they're just so much holier than the rest of society, right? I actually think that is an easy way to avoid.
I'm sorry, Jemar, you cut out there. Say it one more time. I think your headphones might have died. It's all right.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Can you hear me at all?
Yep.
Okay. So I think that sort of third way, I'm neither this, I'm neither that, I'm something else. I think that's actually an easy way out of the difficult political choices that we have to make, especially in a binary system where it's going to be one of the two major parties that's running things at the national, state, and typically local level. So I do think the example of history shows us people like Fannie Lou Hamer, who I talk about in the video. She was part of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. She ran for office as a Democrat, right? Myrlie Evers ran for office a couple of times in her newly adopted state of California after she left Mississippi. It is very clear, I think, when you look at it, especially through a racial justice lens, that there's not a whole lot of options. And taking this hands-off, I'm neither this nor that approach is actually not very helpful.
Okay, can we unpack that for a few minutes, actually? Because I want to say a couple of things here. I want to get your expertise, your thoughts. Let me just say first, I agree with you. I do. I meet plenty of people who are like, you know, we don't pledge allegiance to the to the elephant or the donkey, but to the lamb, right? Now there's part of me that goes, I understand the sentiment, right? I say this often. Ultimately, my allegiance is to the way of Jesus beyond anything else. It's not Republican, it's not Democrat, etc. It's to the nonviolent critique empire way of Jesus. However, that allegiance will lead me somewhere at some point. How does especially maybe in the book, folks, I'm sure folks in the book that you talk about wrestle with this very thing. How do you think about the both and of, well, you know, I think that this political party is the choice I need to find my home in, but I still maintain that my allegiance to Jesus is the paramount ethic that drives me into this position, as opposed to that third way, almost like the gospel coalition kind of vibe of like, guys, just preach the gospel. We just preach the gospel, which for them, of course, is very over spiritualized, not at all embodied, just don't go to hell when you die kind of gospel. So like, how do you think about finding that both and approach instead of either or?
So Frederick Douglass gave it straight, no chaser. And he wrote a letter in response to someone who was asking about race and politics in the day. It was his 1880s, I think. And to that idea of your ultimate allegiance is to Christ, right?
Yeah.
And not to get too in bed with a political party. Here's what he said.
Right.
Frederick Douglass wrote, "Tell the party your wants. Hold the party up to its profession." He said, "Do your utmost to keep it in power, but when it is, hold it accountable." And honestly, I don't think the solution is, or even the goal is, every Christian would vote Democratic, every Christian would vote Republican. I think the goal is Christians would be faithful in whatever political party they're in.
Yeah, right.
Now, to do this, we actually have to turn down the temperature on how we view politics. What do I mean? A lot of Christians, particularly evangelicals, invest way too much meaning in who they're voting for. In other words, it becomes a matter of an eternal salvation.
Right.
Who you vote for. It becomes a matter of your entire life, your entire witness, your entire Christian character.
Right.
When what it actually is a person of conscience and concern evaluating which policies and platforms they think will bring about the most good and the common good. And we can actually disagree on that without calling each other heretics. I think it's a little bit complicated now because we have a party that is supporting someone who refuses to accept the legitimate elections of legitimate results of a democratic election.
Right.
The stakes are different. But if we had, a politics that we were familiar with, let's say, then I don't think the goal is everybody becoming Democratic, everybody becoming Republican. It's everybody being Christian within their political party. And let's not be so darn precious with our political choices in more familiar circumstances.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I mean, yeah. No, I'm with you 100%. It is interesting watching. I tell people often, you're never ever going to see any flag of any politician on my front yard or on the back of my car, nothing like that, right? And it's tough because, again, when all you know is one extreme of like this sycophantic populism of like, this is our Messiah. I mean, literally, I have the books here. I have the literal book, Christ Trump. Okay, like there's a book written how Donald Trump is the new Christ incarnate. This is a real book written by someone. And so when you see that it's published by Christopher John Maluso published this book. I bought it so I can read it, and it's out there. So when that's one option, again, like this goes back to what we were saying with like that you could become kind of the same thing all over again. The other option is not a blind allegiance to a different politician, but looking for the values. I mean, Sharon McMahon, a friend of ours, often says principle over party, and I love that, right? Because I want to use those principles that I have and hold those folks accountable to those principles, pushing for that better path forward. So I think that's really important, especially as we go into an election cycle, how we think about as Christians, how we use our vote, how we advocate for policies and all kinds of things that advocate for the most vulnerable in our society, but also realizing that no politician is going to save the country. There's no one simple answer, just because they have a popular slogan. It's way more complicated than that.
That's what I mean. Like, let's not be so precious with our whoever came up with, the people we're electing are a savior. Goodness, no. There's only one sinless human being in the Christian view, and that's Jesus. And as far as I know, he's not on the ballot. So now what you gonna do?
Right.
Now for Black people, this is not been typically a terribly difficult choice because so much of politics was existential. It's so interesting, right? On one hand, I'm saying, let's not be so precious with it. It's not about your eternal salvation. On the other hand, it is about really weighty matters. For Black people, this was about, are you enslaved or free? Do you have the right to vote? Can you buy homes in certain neighborhoods?
Right.
And
Right.
guess what? In a
Right.
two-party system, there was always a party that was more supportive. I say more, not perfectly, but more
Right. Right.
supportive of Black civil rights and progress, and a party that wasn't. I always cite the first election after the Civil War. The country is rent in two. It's limping and bandaging itself back together. What does the other party run on? This is a white man's country. Let
Yeah.
white men rule. That's
Yeah.
their motto.
No, listen. You can read what some of them say. I mean, Charlie Kirk has said your your whiteness is great. Like, be proud of who you are. You know, I mean, like, it's very clear the direction that they're heading in. I mean, and again, I think and this is what's so important about folks like you, Jemar. The work of the historian, I think, is needed more than ever, because we are in a really unique moment where, because of social media and the information age, new myths and narratives are always being formed about our history, right? And we need historians who are able to bring the receipts to actually tell the story that they want to tell, that's grounded in some place of reality and not just pure mythology. Because you mentioned, and this will come in our out in our conversation in September, but you mentioned how no historian no accurate historian or ethical historian says, I'm just being objective. We all obviously are telling stories, right? But which one is grounded in the most amount of data is the key. And I think folks like yourself, especially with books like this, right, The Spirit of Justice, and the stories that you're telling are so important for us to learn from, because it gives us the eyes to see what's happening right in front of us, that oftentimes terms like whiteness and other things blind us to seeing. Right. And that's why it's so important that we learn from you folks, from you historians, as quickly as possible, because there's so much to learn about our history that we just were never taught. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. I will tell you that much.
And there's plenty of, I mean, this is just more of my soapbox moments. I call it Tisbits on my Substack and podcast. But here's a little Tisbit for you. Like, at some point, we have to stop saying, why didn't someone teach me this before? Why didn't someone teach me this history? And we have to take ownership of the history we know and we don't know.
I agree.
So, like, I mean, folks tuning in tonight, you're fully grown adults. I'm assuming most of you, you're probably out of school, or if you're in school, it's not for this history.
Right.
So when are we going to own our own agency and take responsibility for knowing this? First of all, you have to actually believe in the importance of history. Malcolm X said it this way. He said, of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. I love looking into history for people who talk about the importance of history. Malcolm X, all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. So you got to believe that first and foremost, and then you got to do the work. Books like The Spirit of Justice, Color of Compromise, these are surveys. So it's a great overview. And then I guarantee, if you're open-minded, you're going to get hooked by something. Then check the end notes, do a Google search, go down the rabbit trail, learn more and more and more and more. And that is what helps us get this knowledge and bring it forward to, because again, history helps us see patterns. Political patterns, patterns in the church, patterns in society. And so if we want that knowledge, it's right there.
I'm with you 100%. Jemar, this was awesome. This was so much fun. Anything else you want to mention? I mean, I feel like we really did a great job of you did a great job of giving the overview of the book. We talked about it in our cultural moment. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, so books like this, we'll talk about it on the upcoming podcast, but books like this are a tough sell these days. I just was on a podcast for the book with my alma mater. It was a podcast at Notre Dame, specifically Notre Dame Law School. And it is called literally the DEI podcast. So diversity, equity, inclusion. And it's hosted by a Black lawyer and alum from Notre Dame. And I'm like, brother, you doing okay in that position? And he just kind of laughed because he knew exactly what I was talking about, because things like DEI are so fraught. Things like studying racial history, African American history are so fraught right now. And books like The Spirit of Justice, which talk about racial justice, so fraught. So your support as you tune in tonight, as you contemplate buying the book, it's really critical, because it's a much different landscape in 2024 than it was in 2020, when The Color of Compromise made the New York Times book list, and a record number of books about race did so too.
Yes.
So that's just some context for people. To me, it's not about the sales, the money. It's about getting it into the hands of the people who would appreciate it, who need it for encouragement. And that really doesn't happen without the folks tuning in tonight. So even if you got the book, share it, spread the word. I've got a million different graphics on my social media right now.
Yes.
On my Substack, I released an excerpt of the book today on my Substack. You're going to get another excerpt this week, and then there's another article that I'm looking forward to seeing how people react. I think I called it, I wonder what the critics will say about this one. And I wonder what the critics will bring out. I wonder what the trolls, I wonder what the Megan Bashams of the world will say about The Spirit of Justice. Because last time with The Color of Compromise, they were like, well, he's only telling one side of the story. He's only talking about the racist Christians. What about the abolitionist Christians? What about the, and I'm like, okay, here you go.
Right. Here you go.
A bunch of them are darker skinned than you may want to look at, but it's there.
Right.
So,
I love that. I love that. Well, friends, like I said, that's the wrong one. There we go. So the book, there it is. Boom. That's the book right there. The Spirit of Justice. It's out today, wherever books are sold. Do yourself a favor. First off, thank you everyone so much for the super chats. Like I said, we're splitting all super chats with Jemar Tisby to keep his work going. And please buy the book. And I will tell you that publishers look at two things: pre-orders and book sales once the book is out. So do yourself a favor. Buy the book, have it shipped to you, pick it up on Amazon. It will do Jemar a great service. It will tell his publisher the book is in demand, and you will learn something, which is also really, really important. I cannot thank you enough for being here, friends. And Jemar, thank you for making time. It means the world. We will be back at the end of the month on this channel. Our in-studio conversation, which has even more tea, is dropping. So make sure you subscribe to the New Evangelicals and follow all of Jemar's work on Substack, on social media. And we will see you all next time. Thanks for being here. See you later on.
Peace.